BBC News for Gloucestershire at 5 minutes past 6.
BBC Radio Gloucestershire.
David Smith.
Good evening and welcome to the latest in our series of BBC Radio Gloucestershire election debates. On Friday evening we brought you our Cheltenham debates recorded in front of a live audience in conjunction with the University of Gloucestershire, and you can still listen to that again at bbc.co.uk/Radio Gloucestershire. Over the next 5 nights we're going to hear from some of the candidates standing in the remaining 5 constituencies. I'm David Smith and tonight we're focusing on the Forest of Dean. With me in the studio are 5 of the candidates who want your vote on June the 8th. For the Liberal Democrats, Janet Ellard. The Green Party candidate is James Greenwood. Standing for the Conservatives, Mark Harper. For Labour, it's Sean Stammers. And UKIP's candidate is Ernie Warrender. Also standing in the Forest of Dean is Julian Burrett, an independent candidate. Tonight, we'd also like to hear from you. If you would like to pose a question to the candidates, give us a call, 01452 307575, or text the word GLOS, followed by your message to 81333. That's 01452 307575, or text the word GLOS, followed by your message to 81333. And a reminder that the candidates don't know the questions that we're about to ask them. The only people that do are me and my production team this evening. But if you would like to contribute a question surrounding some of the areas we're going to debate this evening, you are more than welcome. 01452 307575, our number. Candidates, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in. Good evening. Nice to see you on this lovely sunny evening. We're going to start with Janet Ellard for the Liberal Democrats. Janet will start us off on the first question, which is on the topic of wild boar. Where do you stand on the wild boar debate? How big a problem are they?
Well, I believe that the wild boar problem is one which has grown rapidly. Even the Forestry Commission started off by saying the target population was 90, and rather rapidly that increased to 400. And now I believe it's well over 1,000. And although there have been culls, this has not reduced the population back to the target of 400 yet, although that is still the aim, I believe. And I can understand the frustrations of local people, because even if they put up boar-proof fencing, if there is any break in the fencing or any problem with somebody who hasn't closed the gate, for example, the boars seem to be in there when they were nowhere within sight only the day before. So I believe the cull is something which needs to continue, and hopefully over time that will get the population down. But also I feel that the local council perhaps needs to look into subsidising boar-proof cattle grids, for example, and ways of keeping the boar out off sports grounds, cemeteries, etc.
All right, James Greenwood for the Green Party. Where do you stand on this? How big a problem are wild boar in the forest?
They've got out of the forest. I live across the A48 from the forest, down on the river. And we have just started to see incursions coming through to us. So they are spreading out of the forest rapidly. I mean, they're not actually boar. I mean, they're feral pigs, and they were released some time ago and have expanded exponentially since that time. And it is a very serious issue. There's quite a lot of work being done into how you could feed them contraceptives through feed, but it's a tricky, thorny issue. And the real trouble is that there's been a lack of leadership in the forest on bringing all the separate authorities together actually to grapple the problem.
Okay, Mark Harper for the Conservatives.
David, yes, this is a problem that's been around for a while. There was an issue to start off with, that the Forestry Commission felt that there was not a consensus about how it should be dealt with. And in fact, every time they tried to do something about culling the wild boar, they used to get shouted at by animal rights extremists. And one of the things I did to provide some leadership was arrange for the District Council to debate this, to give a very clear steer to the Forestry Commission about local views. They've been able to got some resources, so they recruit extra rangers to make sure they could step up the culling. And in fact, around about now, we would have been having, if the general election hadn't have taken place, a meeting of all the stakeholders, which I was going to chair, to pull them all together to see what more we could do. And that, if I'm re-elected on the 8th of June, that will take place after the general election. The other thing I've done, just picking up the point that Janet mentioned about sports grounds, is spoken to Sport England, ascertained there may be some money available, and I've written to local sports clubs to see if any of them have any issues with damage and get them some resources so they can protect their sports grounds.
Okay, Sean Stammers for Labour.
Well, I actually think the boar should also be seen as a benefit to the forest. I do think that they are out of hand, and I think their numbers have been allowed to grow beyond what is a sustainable level, and I think that really is down to a lack of management and leadership from the current government. We do need to act maybe as the primary predator in the forest, and therefore the justification is there for the coal in order to keep their numbers under control. But I would like to see some form of sustained husbandry of the boar in the forest. I think they attract tourists into the forest. I think they add to the ecological and biodiversity of the forest in a really positive way. I'd be looking for much greater leadership and input, really, from national and regional government to support the Forest of Dean in tackling and utilising the boar as a resource.
Okay, Eddie Warrender for UKIP.
Yes, I mean, I've seen some of the results of their incursions into places like St Stephen's Graveyard, I think. There was Funnily enough, for someone standing for UKIP, this is an issue we could perhaps talk to the Italians, our European friends, about, because they have a thing called a cingale, which is genuine wild boar, and they manage it very, very well. Sean's touched upon it. There's an old business saying there's no such thing as a problem, only an opportunity. If something is done on a positive nature about this, then it can be a benefit for the forest. And I think we should talk to the Italians as to how they manage, deal, contain the cingale, and put those practices into effect in this country, because we are not really versed or skilled in managing wild boar. It's quite a sort of unique problem.
I think Janet alluded to the statistics earlier on. I mean, I've got them in front of me here. Since 2008-9, when the estimate the population was 100 to 150, the target population there was 90. They achieved 38 in a cull. The population now is estimated to be 1,562, going up all the time. The cull's not working, is it? If we're being honest, it's not going to plan, is it? But Sean, you also mentioned a minute ago about embracing them to a certain degree as a tourist attraction. Is that the right way to go?
Oh, absolutely. I think it would be almost an impossibility to actually eradicate the boar. If the coal hasn't been successful, how many more rangers would it take? How many more gunshots do we have to hear across the Forest of Dean as these animals are slaughtered? There's nothing to stop us creating enclosures within which there could be a sustainable plan to actually farm and manage the boar. A similar idea as what is being used with some of the ponies that I believe are sort of up on Plump Hill.
Okay.
I very much think people would come to the forest to see our wildlife, to see our biodiversity. You know, our deers and our badgers, our foxes and our boar. I think that's one of the assets that the forest has to sell.
Okay, Mark Harper, there's a balance to strike here?
Well, I think it's perfectly true that you're not going to eradicate all of them, but equally you can't not manage the numbers. And I think the Forestry Commissioner are experienced in managing the numbers of deer. They've been doing that for many years. Now they've got the extra resources and they've got a very clear level of support from the local population. They've stepped up their culling, and also it's not just about the numbers, it's about keeping them as well in the forest away from settlements, and that would be helped if people didn't feed them, didn't encourage them into populated areas, which is where they do the damage. They're wild animals, and they need to be kept out of settlements. So it's a balance of keeping the numbers under control, making sure that they aren't able to damage public common areas and sports grounds and so forth, and making sure that people don't feed them and don't encourage them out of the forest. And then I think we can manage the problem to the satisfaction of local residents.
Janet, do you want to come in here?
Yes, just a different point, really. I think it would be useful if more information were more readily available, a bit more education about the wild boar, so that the people who are afraid of walking their dogs in the forest know sort of how to act around wild boar, what to do if a wild boar seems to be aggressive, and also information for householders about things they can do to try to discourage wild boar from wandering into settlements.
Well, we talked about management and whose job it is to steer this through and to make sure that people are well aware of what's going on and managing the population. And James, I think you were muttering something during one of the comments from one of the other candidates. James,
I was, and it's been batted backwards and forwards. And local people have been to Mark to see what he can do. They've been to government to see what they can do. They've been to the Forestry Commission, District Council, and really there has been no effective corralling of all these people together to actually come up with a solution and decision. And I blame Mark, really. I think he should be showing leadership on this. It's the kind of opportunity that an MP has to bring all the different bodies together and actually come up with a solution.
We're going to give you right reply here, Mark, then I'll bring Ernie in and we'll move on.
Sure. No, well, James, that was why I arranged for the District Council to have the debate about it, because one of the problems we had was every time the Forestry Commission tried to do something, they got deluged with comment from people outside, which actually largely turned out not to be local, and they felt they didn't really have the public behind them. We had that debate, got a very clear steer, and as I said, I've been working with them and local bodies and some of the parish councils, and indeed, as I said, we were going to have a stakeholder meeting which had been scheduled for this month, which had to be postponed because obviously the Forestry Commission, for one, can't participate in that during the election period. And my plan, if I were re-elected, is that will take place shortly after the general election before the summer, and we can draw those plans together.
All right. Let me just very quickly bring Ernie Warrender in, and then we'll move on. Wasn't there a chap who was leading the cull? There was a chap from Germany who knew all about this at one stage, wasn't there?
I'd be happy to think so, but what I might say is I take issue. Point one, we seem to have managed to eradicate vast amounts of species across the globe. We eradicated wild boar and wolves from Britain years ago, so we can if we so desire. But point two, rather than management, I think they should go back to husbandry, because there is a huge industry, as I said, in Italy, certainly about this, and it is something that will bring people to the forest. They won't do as they're told. I think that's fairly obvious. They won't do as they're told. So you're going to have to either corral them, manage them, but you cannot sort of wander around trying to get these wild boar to do as they're told. I think it's a fact.
We could devote the whole hour to wild boar, I suspect, and possibly be no further forward, but we'll see how we go. You're listening to a special BBC Radio Gloucestershire election debate this evening, live from our studios on London Road in Gloucester, focusing on some of the candidates who are standing for the Forest of Dean constituency. If you want to contribute to tonight's discussion, 01452 307575, or text the word Glos and your message to 81333. You might have heard Friday night's debate in Cheltenham, which we hosted in conjunction with the University of Gloucestershire. And I'm going to do a question now, going to go on to a question now, which we thought was wonderfully succinct, so we thought we'd revisit it. This is a question from one of our audience members on Friday night. What type of Brexit would you support? James Greenwood for the Green Party.
Well, we in the Green Party, although divided like most of the parties, were predominantly amongst our membership and overridingly in favour of staying within the EU. What we didn't have was an opportunity to vote for a way in which we could look to reform the EU. So here we are in this place where people were given a vote with very little information, a lot of lies, and we have a decision made, 52-48. Our feeling is that what we should be looking for is, once the negotiations have been concluded, an opportunity for the British public to actually listen to what's been achieved in those negotiations and have a decision to make as to whether they want to go through with those negotiations in that Brexit, or to ignore them. And that's our position at the moment. So we want another referendum on the deal, not another referendum of in or out, but a referendum on the deal.
Okay, thank you very much. Another referendum on the deal. Mark Harper.
Well, I think just on that point, I think if you do that, you'll make sure our European partners give us the worst possible deal if we're going to have another referendum. I think it's very clear. Look, I voted to remain, but I'm a Democrat. I accept the decision of the British people. They've decided they want to leave. And actually, one of the big decisions that we need to decide at this election is who's going to lead that negotiation and who the public trust to get the best possible deal for the United Kingdom. Now, I'm very clear that I think Theresa May will get us the best possible deal. The only other alternative Prime Minister to be sat in that negotiation chair is Jeremy Corbyn, and I think the public need to think very carefully about who, shortly after the general election, they want to be leading that debate to get the best Brexit deal for Britain. I'm clear it's Theresa May. The only alternative person is Jeremy Corbyn, and even most of his MPs, in fact his shadow Brexit secretary, doesn't think he's up to leading those negotiations and wrote to tell him so. So I think Theresa May will provide that strong leadership in those Brexit negotiations.
Okay.
as we move forward.
Appropriately move on to Labour then, Sean Stammers.
Well, I have, 100% confidence in the honesty and integrity of Jeremy Corbyn to represent this country to the very best of his abilities. And the reality is it won't be Theresa May that is sat there at the Brexit table. It'll actually be Boris Johnson. And in his place, Labour would send, our respected solicitor and QC, Keir Starmer. So this isn't actually about the personalities and who sits around tables and bullies people through negotiations. Our trading partners, our allies in Europe have far more respect for us than to just punish us on the basis of, a round table negotiation. Personally, I actually agree that we should have another referendum essentially on the deal, because the last referendum was informed by lies, more lies, and then statistics.
On both sides, though.
On both sides. I don't doubt that. But what I do doubt is the weight of opinion that was being pushed out there by our media in a very anti-European way. Where is the £350 million for the NHS? You cannot simply deny the impact that promise had on the British public.
We'll get on to discuss that, I'm sure, when we have this open to general discussion in a moment. So 2 more candidates to hear from. First of all, UKIP's Ernie Warrender.
Gosh, I feel outnumbered. Basically, it was made crystal clear by David Cameron, George Osborne. It's on YouTube. If people want to look at it, you were voting to leave the EU and the single market and all the benefits. Crystal clear. One thing that does concern me, which is why I continue to give my all to this party, is Mrs May was a Remainer. Most of her front bench Remainers. Her parliamentary Brexit committee, 11-7 Remainers. The man who has written her manifesto was quoted saying he was sick to the pit of his stomach when he got the Brexit result. If this is not really an election about electing a government, that's pretty much, despite her best efforts, a done deal. This is about electing an effective opposition. And as you've heard, Labour and I assume Lib Dems, Greens will have you back at the polling booths for another referendum. Someone needs to put UKIP MPs in Parliament to make the point and to hold Mrs May to that which more than 52% of the British people want now, because I actually been out canvassing today and met several people who said, actually, I voted Remain. I just want to get on with it now, please. And there's a lot like that.
Let's move on to Janet Ellard for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, I was very pleased to hear that the Labour candidate supports the idea that the Lib Dems have, that the Greens also support, that we should have a referendum on the deal when we know what it is. But what I would respond to that question, what type of Brexit would you support? I would support a type of Brexit which the majority of the population of the UK would be happy with. I think it's a great pity that over the last year there seem to have been very few politicians who've continued to speak up for the people who wanted to stay in the EU. Even MPs such as Mark, who themselves were Remainers, don't seem to be speaking up for that part of the population in the Forest of Dean. And it's why we're against a strong Brexit, why we would be in favour of staying in the single market.
Okay.
And just today, I believe 50 business leaders wrote a letter appealing to stay in the single market. I would like to see ordinary people reasonably happy with the deal. Business leaders happy with the deal.
Let's discuss this in a bit more detail, shall we? And just to give you a bit of context here, the Forest of Dean voted leave in a big way. 58.6% of those who voted to 41.4% for Remain on a turnout of just over 77%. James, I want to take you back to something you mentioned earlier on, and I know that Janet is in agreement with you on this, and Sean for Labour as well. You talked about a referendum on the deal, effectively, another go, effectively. And Mark made the point that shows weakness. That shows surely a united front is better to say we're in this now for better or for worse. This is what we've set our course on, and as a country we're united and heading in one direction.
Well, I don't think we are united. Unfortunately, I think people have very, different ideas as to what exactly Brexit is. And I think the most important aspects of it, in my mind, are we going to have freedom of movement or not? What is going to happen to all those Brits who live in Europe? what is going to happen to all the Europeans who live in Europe, and how are we going to trade with each other? These seem to be crucial questions. We have no idea what the answers are to any of those questions.
But we didn't have any idea when we went and voted, did we?
Well,
There was no type of Brexit on the ballot paper, was there? So it's
in
fair
my
to say
mind,
we put our trust in our politicians.
In my mind, the debate was incredibly, shallow and thin, and as I said, and others have said, full of lies.
All right. I'm going to encourage our panel to come in on it.
David, look, I talked to a lot of people during that campaign and since, and I think it's slightly patronising to pretend that the public didn't know what they were doing. Actually, a lot of people took a great deal of time and trouble to research this. The public have made a decision. So when Janet says she's surprised people aren't speaking up for it, the fact is we had a referendum. We said, the government said, for which I was a member at the time, the public would make the decision and the government would respect the decision and implement it.
It's a heck of a complex decision to entrust in the people, though, isn't it?
People said they wanted to leave the European Union, and it seems to me when you say what kind of Brexit, it seems to me that we do need to leave the single market, because if we stay in the single market, we have to have freedom of movement of people, and we have to stay within the European Court of Justice, and we still have to pay money into the system like the Norwegians. And I'm afraid if all of those things are true, I think most people wouldn't feel that we'd actually left the European Union at all. So I think we have to do that. The Prime Minister set out her negotiating strategy in very great detail. That's the strategy that she will carry out if she's re-elected as Prime Minister. And I think that gives a lot of people confidence. And if you look at the polls, those people that voted to leave clearly want us to leave. But actually, about half the people that voted Remain accept the democratic decision of the British people and want us to get on with it. So I think it's about 2/3 of the country wants the Prime Minister to get on with this and do a good job.
Bring you in here, Sean. I mean, it's fair to say we know where Theresa May stands. We don't really know where Jeremy Corbyn stands, do we? Because he's been all over the place on Europe, hasn't he? Disappeared throughout the campaign.
I don't believe that's true at all. Just because the media didn't actually follow the rallies that Jeremy Corbyn delivered does not mean they didn't happen. And I think Jeremy Corbyn actually was possibly one of the most honest and open politicians in the whole debate. He didn't come out and say he was 100% in favour of Europe, and he didn't come out and say he was 100% in favour of leaving. He was willing to actually moderate what he was saying and tell people it's your choice, it is your decision, and he gave his personal opinion. And I mean, I think it's very important to note that the Labour Party does respect the outcome of the referendum.
You do.
And
you
Jeremy
said you want
Corbyn,
the referendum.
I would like the people to decide on the details of the deal, Mark.
Or what? Or
The
they stay
details
in?
of the deal.
Yeah, and what's the alternative if they don't like the deal?
If they don't like the deal?
We stay in the European Union, is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not.
Well, what do we do if they don't like the deal then?
We're stuck in.
Then we leave without a deal, don't we?
On
That's
world trade.
the other
So what's
option.
The, what's
On world
the point
trade.
of the, what's
Because
the point of
people
asking-
have the right to look at the deal and say, actually, I don't want that deal and I want to stay in.
Oh, so they'd stay in then. So we are basically, you want to have another referendum because you don't accept the decision people made in the first place.
No,
So this is the
no,
problem. We
Mark.
had a
I
democratic
accept.
decision.
I
and people have
accept.
made their choice.
I accept that the government was given a mandate to pursue the exit of the EU. Take the actual detail of that to the population and let them decide when they know the full impact of exiting the EU.
There are two other candidates I must bring in here before we move on to the next question. Only Warren, you're sitting back in your chair listening to this, but this isn't this a fair argument here? Let's be honest. Let's see what cards are on the table from Brussels here, and when we know what they are, we'll decide if we want to do it. What's wrong with that?
There's a slight lack of common sense here. The people of Great Britain are the employers. The government are their employees. They dictate the strategy, and then they empower a government to carry that strategy out. I think, having been on the doorsteps today, if the people of Great Britain have another referendum or even another election, they'll just have had enough. They will give them very, very clear options. I'm fascinated to hear the fact that actually
Are you
Remain
bothered
never
it
got a
might go
fair
the other
shout.
way? Are you bothered it might go the other way? If they get another choice, are you bothered it might flip back the other way? They might say, do you know what, I don't like the idea of this in the
I
end."
think on the basis, I must agree with Mark, that they're now saying that pretty much 50% of the people who voted Remain are saying, no, that's fine, democratic decision, let's get on with it. It will be a huge landslide.
You kept using the term Remainers a lot. I thought we ditched that now. I thought we're all in this together. You seem to have a problem with people who are Remainers negotiating for Britain.
Yes, I do, actually. I find it very interesting suddenly, and it predominantly started happening about 10 days before this snap election was called. There were road to Damascus conversions by so many Remain Tory MPs.
And what's
I
wrong with
would
that? If
struggle-
it's going along with what you're happy with, what's wrong with that?
I would struggle to find somebody who believes in something. For the self-same reason, I respect Dennis Skinner immensely. I don't agree with a word he says, but I totally respect him because he believes in that, and I do not trust most of these people to actually believe in this.
Okay, let me finally just bring in Janet Ellar for the Liberal Democrats. Janet, let's be honest, people have had election fatigue, referendum fatigue. We've had enough, haven't we? We don't want another vote on another deal. Just let the politicians get on with it.
Try telling the SNP that. Yeah. Yes, I mean, you have a point, but I think if a second referendum were to take place, then surely if your faith, Mark, in the Prime Minister is correct, she will have got the right deal for the people of the UK, and they will vote in favour of that deal. If they vote against it in a second referendum, it will show that she has not got as good a deal as she thinks.
But if they voted against it in the second referendum, we're in stuck, aren't we? We're
Janet,
in big trouble.
Janet, if you go to our European partners and you say we're going to have another referendum and we're going to put the deal that they give us or we stay in, you're guaranteeing that we will get the worst possible deal because they want us to stay in. So you will guarantee that we don't get a good deal, and the public who voted for this in a democratic decision will think we're taking the mick out of them. We had a referendum, a good turnout, and a clear decision.
Janet, very quickly answer that and we need to move on.
Well, I wanted to go back to your, when you mentioned strength. I don't think strength is necessarily the most important thing when handling negotiations with somebody. I mean, everybody knows we have a certain amount of strength. We are a significant country. We are a prosperous country. But I think negotiations can be better if you act more like a friend than an enemy, if you're cooperative and approachable, rather than trying to be a very difficult
We need to move on.
person.
We need to move on to our next question. This is BBC Radio Gloucestershire. You're listening to our live Forest of Dean election debate, the first of 5 we're going to be holding this week. If you want to weigh in on what you're hearing from the candidates, 01452 307575, or text the word Glos and your message to 81333. Our next question, again, quite a simple one, but the answer is far from that by the sounds of it. Will you support fracking in the Forest of Dean? And we start with Mark Harper for the Conservatives.
Well, the very simple answer, David, is that fracking is about extracting shale gas from shale rock. And if you look at the geological studies, there isn't actually any shale rock under the Forest of Dean. So there isn't actually a possibility to have fracking because there simply isn't anything to frack. So it's this question came up at the last general election. I took the trouble to research it. So it simply can't happen because there isn't any shale rock under the Forest of Dean. So it's a sort of a very interesting hypothetical question, but not one that has any practical significance.
We'll get on to perhaps to why that licence was issued in the first place, if that be the case. Sean Stammers for Labour.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't actually believe what Mark has said at all. I think the original licensing application allowed the test drills to go down 1,000 metres, and that's actually essentially it's well below the coal bed methane that we're talking about, and it's trying to tap in to the potential of shale gas much deeper in the ground. All I would say is I don't want to know actually whether there is shale gas under the Forest of Dean, because I am 100% against fracking, not just in the Forest of Dean, but actually across the whole of the UK. And I think there's overwhelming support for that position in the Forest of Dean.
Ernie Warrender for UKIP.
Yeah, really simple answer. I'm against it. No.
Simple as that.
Simple.
All right, we move on. Liberal Democrats, Janet Ellard.
Yes, well, as a Liberal Democrat, we are against fracking. And I know that in the forest, again, the question has receded into the background because South Western Energy chose not to go ahead with drilling in the forest at all. I would love to think that the problem has been solved permanently by the fact that there is no shale rock in the forest. But this seems to be new news.
It's not new news. It's what I said in answer to this question at the general election 2 years ago.
it
Sit back
doesn't.
a bit from up, yeah, that's-
It doesn't. This information doesn't seem to be out there on the internet anywhere. I mean, as I'm saying, great. If there is no cause to drill in the forest. I mean, at the moment anyway, the problem has receded because with low fuel prices, it's not worth anyone's while looking for shale gas in the Forest of Dean. But I do think that if what you say doesn't prove to be correct, the risk could come back again, and people might need to fight again to make their views heard.
Let me bring James Greenwood in for the Green Party just finally, then we will discuss this in detail. James?
Well, as expected, the Green Party is dead against fracking, and there was a very good campaign fought within the forest against the potential exploration of shale gas and coal bed methane in the forest, and we're very glad that the licence hasn't been taken up. I mean, on a wider point, we are against the extraction of fossil fuels per se. What we need, and needs in a major way to avoid catastrophic climate change, is a large investment in renewables. I think the forest has huge opportunity for wind and for solar, and we need to be pursuing that course rather than taking fossil fuels out of the ground. We need to leave them in the ground.
And a question from Owen Adams. We may well have covered this territory as we've had a discussion here, but I'm just going to read out Owen's question anyway. What will you do if elected to protect the Forest of Dean from fracking, given that the Conservatives propose to allow exploratory drilling without the need for planning permission, and that all parties on the District Council are opposed to fracking? Let me bring you in here, Mark. I mean, you're effectively saying that there is no case to answer. There's nothing under there. So why was the licence issued then?
Well, the licence was issued for people. It wasn't a specific licence. It was the whole country was opened up for people to go exploring for fracking. But as I said, I think the company discovered what I discovered, which is there is no shale rock under the Forest of Dean, so there's no possibility of doing fracking to extract gas from it. I mean, just on the wider question about energy, I mean, I think we have to have a balanced energy mix. I don't want to see solar panels carpeting the countryside. I think they're very sensible to put them on buildings and things. But I also think you have to be realistic here. I support nuclear power, which is a low carbon form of energy, which can generate a significant amount of electricity. The Greens are against that as well. We do have to generate electricity, and we have to generate it in a sensible way that's low carbon.
Let's keep on fracking. Sure. Sean, you disagree with Mark when we talk about licences and issuing, and there's nothing underneath there. You're not buying this.
No, I'm not 100% convinced. I think the original licence was issued on the basis that they would be searching for coal bed methane. It was never openly admitted that they would be going, as deep as 1,000 metres to look for the shale gas. But I think this is a UK-wide issue, and this is where I do agree with the Green Party. I think the biggest single challenge that we face is an environmental catastrophe, and we need to be moving away from fossil fuels.
Okay.
We need to be committed to green energy sources.
Let's imagine, let me bring you in here, Ernie Warrender for UKIP. Let's imagine there's an economic circumstance in the future which merits this exploration. Would you then back it? Would you then support it if there was money to be made, if we needed to do it?
I can't see as there would be, to be honest, and it's difficult to quote on hypotheticals. But at the end of the day, the forest is a very different area. There are areas like this throughout the UK that stand aside to the norms, and the forest is one of those areas. And to sort of allow things like fracking to happen in these areas of special interest is wrong. It is wrong. And I think that were licences, and we've heard here licences have been granted, but don't worry, there's nothing there, I promise. If there were, I would like to think that everyone in the forest would join me, James, Sean, Janet, possibly not you, Mark, and riot about this. Yeah?
Well, Ernie, with the greatest respect, I've lived in the forest for 17 years and it's my home. You don't live there and neither does Janet. So I'm not going to take any lectures from you about looking after the place I call home, thank you. And I've been very clear, there is no shale rock under the Forest of Dean, so you can't really extract shale gas from shale rock. This is a piece of scaremongering that really has no foundation to it.
Let me just very quickly bring Janet in, and then James one more time, then we must move on.
Well, I'd like to come back on the sort of not living there. I live a tiny distance over the
Wales?
border. I've worked in Colford for 10 years. I drive through the forest every day to work. I work within the forest, so the fact that I happen to sleep in a different place, I go there for my leisure. I've lived in the area for over 30 years. I know the forest quite well. I've taught half the
Let's get
population
back
of
onto
one
the issue,
corner of the
onto
forest.
the issue of fracking. Right?
Yes.
Let's not debate geography.
Yes.
Let's do fracking.
No, I mean, I don't really have any more to say about fracking, but I would back up what a couple of the other candidates have said, that we do need to invest in renewables. For example, support tidal lagoons along the Severn.
Okay.
None are proposed for
All
the
right.
forest area at the moment.
Very
but-
quickly, James Greenwood for the Green Party. Very quickly, if you would, James, we need to move
just
on.
to answer Owen's question, if elected, I thought it was an open door for Mark. Here were a whole constituency who were dead against fracking. Here were the local council.
A whole
also.
constituency?
Well, there was a very large feeling against fracking. I couldn't say there will be members of the Forest of Dean who certainly are pro-fracking. So I misspoke there. But certainly most people, the vast majority, were against fracking, and all the local council were too. It seemed to be an opportunity for the MP to come down and stamp the thing out.
I just said there isn't any, but also you've got to treat people like grown-ups. There isn't any shale rock under the Forest of Dean, so there can't be any fracking to extract shale gas.
So why don't you come out on the street with
going
everyone else?
well,
Why don't you come out and
because,
show your
James,
your
going
your
along with
dislike
some
of the
piece
idea?
of scaremongering, pretending that there's some threat when there actually isn't one, I don't think is very
Well, that's
sensible.
not
I
what
want to
people
treat-
felt.
No.
You should have been out there
Well,
saying
I think
there
dealing
is no threat.
James,
I didn't feel
think-
that. So you're
well,
coming from a government that is
James,
pro-fracking.
I was asked this question at the general election 2 years ago. I gave a very straightforward answer, which has
But
turned out to
we
be
needed you
completely
out
true.
there. We needed the MP
Well,
out there actually pushing back against their own government.
But James, there isn't a problem to solve here because there isn't any shale rock under the Forest of Dean, so there isn't a threat. Going around creating pretend threats.
I wasn't
don't
creating the
think is
threats.
very
It was your
sensible.
government
Okay.
issuing the licences.
Let's stop that there, because we will be here till gone 9 o'clock if we continue with that one. A lot of emotive issues in the Forest of Dean, and they're being explored tonight here on a special BBC Radio Gloucestershire election debate special. If you want to have your say, want to weigh in on some of the topics we're covering with the candidates, it's 01452 3075 575. 19 minutes left of our debate on the Forest of Dean this evening, and I'll give you the rundown of where we're going, or who we're hearing from, I should say, over the course of the rest of the week in a few minutes' time. Going to move on to the topic of health now. The geography of the Forest of Dean makes it difficult for some people to access health care. Let me ask our candidates now, how would you improve access to good health care in rural areas like the Forest? And crucially, how are you going to pay for it? Let's start with Sean Stammers for Labour.
Well, since 2010, we've actually seen the largest sustained drop in funding of our NHS as a percentage of GDP since it was founded. Now, the Labour Party believes in the NHS. It believes that it should remain publicly owned and essentially publicly run. In the Forest itself, we have a difficult question, and what we are looking for is we need a new state-of-the-art hospital in the Forest of Dean. We cannot and we should not give up the facilities we actually have in Lydney and Dilk, the two community hospitals, until that new facility is built. One of the issues about accessing healthcare in the Forest of Dean is actually the transport links and the appalling state of our bus network. It is actually incredibly difficult to move around the key towns in the centre of the Forest of Dean, and this is affecting people's abilities to attend the hospitals, the clinics, the GP surgeries, as well as other services. So I really would like to look at that internal transport so people can access the services that currently exist and then work to improve and to have that state-of-the-art facility that we've been promised.
Only Warrender for UKIP.
Well, I'm glad to hear Mark admits the Tories don't take lectures from anyone who might know a little bit more than them. It's been sort of quite symptomatic of them. With the greatest of respect, one of the things I've picked up on, although I have to apologise to the Foresters, you got lumbered with me because the candidate who should have stood, Richard Leppington, was ill. Okay? I have looked into the issues. One of the things that surprises me, there is no maternity hospital now in the Forest, which to me affects the rights of people who need to be born within the 100 of St Bravils. And that is one key thing I've made a platform of my campaign in this, not to moan at people because they don't live in the Forest, but to actually look at this and get a maternity hospital back firstly and foremostly. I agree with Sean. I find it amazing that the way the NHS it gets in more and more trouble. And something needs to be done about it. Sean will probably pick up on the 365 million quid, but there was certainly a lot of money that we can take and divert into our NHS.
You upped it by 15 million there.
Did I?
Yeah.
That's inflation.
I mean, okay, all right, let's move on. Janet L.R. for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, this question is specifically about the forest, but obviously the right policies at a national level will also have an effect within the forest. And, in the past, I've been in favour of trying to lower the deficit within the UK. And obviously, if things like the NHS operate more efficiently, then that helps. But I think we've just come to a stage when so many trusts, healthcare trusts, have made almost all the savings they possibly can, and more money needs to be invested in the NHS. And that is why I support the Lib Dem policy of putting one extra penny on income tax that will be ring-fenced to go to the NHS and social care.
Okay. James Greenwood for the Green Party.
I'm going to just pick up on the national points, and we've got to work out as a society what actually is of value to us. And I think one of the interesting things is when you look at the amount of GDP that is spent on health, in this country is 9%. In France and Germany is 12%. So we're spending a lot less money than our European potential ex-partners than we should be. And there is a classic case of underfunding. There has been a welter of top-down management, which we were told we weren't going to have, the absurd PFI programme, which is going to result in £307 billion that still needs to be paid off, and that is going to be buying assets that was worth a fifth of that figure. So we've got, a serious issue at a national level, and at a local level, we just seem to find year in, year out that the service is being sucked out of the forest, and people are having to travel large distances to go into Gloucester. In my mind, people should be coming out of Gloucester into the forest. And I have been, this is my third time that I've stood, and every time I've said we need our own district hospital in the forest. Mark will say there's no money, but there is. We've got plenty of money. But it's just being spent on the wrong things.
Let me bring Mark Harper in for the Conservatives.
Well, a couple of things. I've always campaigned for better local health service. I mean, the only time we actually had a threat to our local health services in the Forest of Dean was under the last Labour government, and we had a cross-party campaign which I led, which was successful, and we kept them. Actually, we've had more local services delivered. We've now got a very good dialysis service where that's provided locally for people that need it. We've got more chemotherapy services provided locally, and I want to see more services provided locally where that's sensible. Strengthen primary care with our GPs and our pharmacists. We've invested in our manifesto. We're going to invest more money so that we grow the amount of NHS spending, not just in real terms after inflation, but also per head of population. That then gives us the money to invest in good local health services, which are incredibly important for constituents in the Forest of Dean.
Let's discuss this in a bit more detail. We talked about, and I'm going to use a terrible term here, a proper hospital. I think that's what a lot of people want, a fully functioning hospital in the Forest of Dean. I mean, Sean, we come back to that issue of money again, don't we? Sean Stammers for Labour. There's only so much money to go around. The NHS has to cut its cloth accordingly, and you've got to look at population centres. And with the greatest will in the world, the Forest of Dean is not a big one, is it?
No, not in comparison to a regional average, but the rural landscape, the geography of the forest does mean that it is difficult to travel the long distances. And I don't think this should just be down to a population level. It's about the needs of the community.
But it's about money at the end of the day, isn't it?
Ultimately, it does come down to money, and I think this is what the health issue is for the Forest of Dean. It's about whether or not we want a publicly owned national health service or we want the Tories to privatise it.
We're not going to privatise it.
You are
That's
privatising it,
absolute
Mark.
nonsense,
If you
surely.
look at the example in Dorset today, okay, if you ring up today for a GP appointment in Dorset, you will wait 4 weeks to get a 7-minute appointment. If you're willing to pay £40, you can get a 10-minute telephone appointment.
Mark can fight his own battles, but nowhere in the Conservative manifesto do they say they are going to privatise the NHS.
No, because it would be political suicide for them
We're
to
not
do
gonna
so.
do it.
So
We've
they
got
are
a-
doing it
No.
piecemeal, slowly, over time.
That's simply not
We are
true.
losing peripheral services.
We've got a
we've
got a publicly funded, available at the point. I don't want to live in a country where people have to worry about paying for their healthcare. We have a publicly funded healthcare system, which I support, available free at the point of use, which I will continue supporting. And it's about getting better local services, which I've always campaigned for.
Will you back an improved hospital in the Forest?
Well, I think what we need to do is have more services here. Now, you can't have a district general hospital. You can't have a district general hospital providing very serious operations. You can't have hundreds of them across the country, because you've got to have skilled surgeons doing those operations on a regular basis.
So no emergency department, no A&E then?
That's right. You can't do that on a very small level, because you simply couldn't staff it. What I want to see are as many services as you can sensibly deliver provided locally. That's more primary care. That's seeing GPs as they do in the Forest. We've got some excellent GPs delivering more services in their surgeries. I want to strengthen the offer at community hospital level. I want to use our pharmacists better, and only have people have to use the district general hospitals in Gloucester and Cheltenham when they really need to do so.
Okay, James Greenwood for the Green Party.
And I think one of the interesting things about the Forest is actually how many people work in care and health and well-being. We have a large percentage of the population that are already involved in that field, and I think it's an extraordinary opportunity actually to bring employment back to the Forest for so many of those 14,500 people that had to leave every day to go out. And the idea that surgeons wouldn't want to come and live in the Forest and set up home and work here, I find strange.
I just want to bring a document in which we looked at a little earlier on here at BBC Radio Gloucestershire, changes to NHS referral services, which was an NHS document which was focusing mainly on those who live right at the edge of the Forest of Dean on the border with Wales, whose GP might be Welsh. And they were then sort of going through the Welsh NHS system, if you like, rather than the English system. And I've got to be honest, I read this cover to cover. I can't make head and tail of it. I can't make any sense of this whatsoever. So perhaps you can help us understand here then, Ernie. And if you were the next MP for the Forest of Dean, how would you deal with cross-border health issues?
Well, there's an old saying, isn't it? The very length of this report defends itself against ever being read. Basically, I take issue with Mark. There are quite good functioning hospitals with A&Es at Malvern, places like Shepton Mallet. They're not big hospitals.
Let's stick on the cross-border issues. How would you deal with cross-border issues?
With regards to this, it's difficult because since we've set up a Welsh Assembly, the Welsh NHS is run specifically like that. The Scottish one is. I want to major on the fact that you've got failing or you've got receding health services in the Forest. Yes, the Forest sits very close to Wales in a variety of other areas as well. Where you've got people who've got the choice, can make that choice to go to Wales or to go to an English one, they'll make that choice. People are like water, they'll follow the easiest and most sensible route. What I'm saying is keep them in the Forest.
Right. I might make the choice to go to Wales for my free prescriptions, but my wait for a surgeon might be a bit longer.
You might, and you will take that and you will weigh it up. And I don't say that's right, and I didn't create this system.
We'll go around very quickly.
David, on this cross-border issue, look, this is very clear. This is for people. There's about 10,000 of them that have a GP that's based in Gloucestershire but registered in Wales. They were previously being forced to use the NHS in Wales, which they didn't want to do. I've worked incredibly hard with an organisation called Action for Our Care. We've got a good solution there, which basically means you can go to those GPs and they refer you to hospitals in England. Right. You have that choice, which is your right.
I need to bring Janet in here. Janet LR for the Liberal Democrats. How would you deal with the cross-border difficulties here then?
Yeah, I think people living on both sides of the border are aware of cross-border issues, not just in health, but affecting things like transport as well. And I know that there have been improvements. The case that you mentioned, Mark, there have been some improvements where health is concerned, but there are still issues.
So how do we deal with it then? How do we nail this down then?
Well, I do think that it needs the leadership of the MP to continue working on the issues that remain. For example, I talked to a lady only a couple of days ago who was suffering from cancer, and because she was registered with a Welsh GP on the English side of the border, her blood samples were sent to Wales. And that caused enormous problems because she was having her treatment in Gloucester and Cheltenham.
If it's you,
things like that need to be ironed out.
If it were you, if you were elected as the Forest of Dean's MP, very simply, is there a simple solution to this, or is this a problem we're going to have to deal with for a while?
There is not a simple solution, but I mean, the first thing is to listen to people, listen to doctors, find out what are the problems that remain, and to ask the people who know what they would suggest as a solution.
We need to move on. We've got 6 minutes left. I want to try and get 2 questions in, so we're going to have to move fairly rapidly to try and do that between now and 7 o'clock. Whoever wins this election is going to face the decision of whether to abolish the 7 bridge tolls. The Conservatives and Labour say they will do it, while UKIP and the Lib Dems have said they've been making this case for a while and they've in fact nicked the policy. Is making this cheaper and easier to commute in and out of the forest a good or a bad thing? 30 seconds each if we can. Only Warrender.
We've campaigned for it for a long, long time. I own and run businesses both sides of the border, and there is no doubt it is a drag on investment going into Wales when you've got to pay, I think, £13.60 to get a small van across the bridge. Who's going to do it? It adds to costs. I think it will help open up Wales. It'll also help in the forest as well, because don't forget, as we've heard, a lot of the forest borders Wales. And I think this spreading of the economic benefit is overall good. I don't say they've nicked it. I'd like to say they're listening to us.
Janet Ellard for the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, well, obviously we're in favour of abolishing the tolls on the Severn Bridge. And I would say that this would be good for employment, that people in that southwestern corner of the forest would be able to travel more easily to places like Bristol and Bath for jobs without having to pay out more than £30 a week.
Aren't you in danger of them taking their money with them? Aren't you in danger of them heading off to Cribbs Causeway Shopping Centre and spending money there rather than in the forest?
I think they already do that. They pop into Chepstow and hop on a bus. Sorry.
All right. James Greenwood for the Green Party.
We want to see more people on public transport, obviously. But when it comes to employment, so I saw some shocking figures last week. I mean, this is between 2011 and 2016. Employment in the UK has gone up 1.6%. In Gloucestershire as a whole, it's gone up 1.2%. But in the Forest of Dean, it's gone up 0.1%.
So is this good news or not? Then,
this to me would seem to be very, very bad news, and something is going seriously wrong in the way in which business is being attracted and encouraged in the forest.
So you wouldn't get anybody coming across the bridge, and you probably could get great numbers coming across the bridge if you abolished it, but you wouldn't be for that.
Take it down to half, but it's what we need to see in terms of public transport.
Right. Okay.
Is what this is about.
Mark Harper for the Conservatives, halve the toll rather than abolish it completely.
No, I'm pleased the Prime Minister made this announcement, and I really don't understand James's point. We now see unemployment in the Forest of Dean is at record low levels, which I'm very pleased to see. I support local businesses creating good local jobs, and we've got some fantastic employers in the constituency. I was at a business the other week that's growing very fast, so I want to see that unemployment continue to fall and give people the opportunities.
So what's the answer? This is a good thing.
Yeah, I said it was a good thing at the beginning.
Good thing at the beginning.
No, it's a good thing. I'm
but
pleased
what about
the Prime
those
Minister's
economic
made the
drawbacks, though? Money flowing out of the Forest of Dean.
No, I think the decision's a good one. I mean, it's worth remembering, of course, that the old Severn Bridge, of course, sits on the Forest of Dean. It's not actually in Wales at all. Both ends of it are in England. And I've had lots of constituents wanting to get rid of the tolls, and I'm pleased the Prime Minister's made that announcement.
Very quickly, Sean Stammers for Labour.
I think, getting rid of the tolls is going to be a good thing for the forest. I think, we need to encourage people in the forest to spend in the forest. That needs to be kind of a pledge from our councillors and our parish councillors, etc., and encourage people to spend in the forest. But we also actually want people to go outside of the forest to work, earn their money outside the forest, and then be able to bring it in without penalty and spend it in the forest.
So you're not worried about that? I've tried all the pro candidates on this one with this one, but you're not worried about that temptation of heading across the bridge and coming back for nothing?
I think that temptation already exists. I think people go over the border into Chepstow and Cardiff. I think people leave the forest to go to Monmouth, and they go to Gloucester, and they go to Hereford. Too much money is already flowing out of the forest as people go to buy their goods and services.
Okay.
And we really need to work on trying to focus that expenditure in the forest itself.
We don't have a lot of time for our last question, but I want to get this in. And really, we're looking at 20 seconds maximum, really, on this one to finish with if I can. If you are elected on election day on June the 8th, in the early hours of the morning into June the 9th, as the next MP for the Forest of Dean, what would be your first priority for the Forest of Dean? Quickly, if we can here, Janet Ellard for the Liberal Democrats.
For the Forest of Dean specifically?
Your first priority, quickly as we can. What would be your first priority? Well, shall I come back to you?
Yeah,
I'll come back
please
to you.
do.
James Greenwood for the Green Party, your first priority, please.
My first priority would be to engage with the local councillors, and lots of them across the board, and work out how we can actually start to bring jobs into the forest.
Talk to the councillors about jobs, then. That's yours. OK. Mark Harper for the Conservatives. Your first priority, please.
Well, I continue doing what I've done as the MP for the last 12 years, which is support local businesses getting jobs here. And I think that's probably the top priority. We've had a great deal of success, and I'd hope to continue doing that.
Sean Stammers for Labour.
I think it's about focusing on education and raising aspiration in the forest. My first priority would be to work with the college, work with the sixth forms, work with the secondary schools, so they can work collaboratively and cooperatively about a broad curriculum for the Forest of Dean.
Ernie Warrender for UKIP.
Get a maternity hospital back in the forest to preserve the foresters' rights.
Janet Ellar for the Liberal Democrats, just finally, your first
I'm
priority?
going to be very boring, having taught in a college in the forest. I know Sean teaches in a college as well. Yes, education, but both vocational and more academic within the forest. None of this travelling out that foresters seem to have to do
That's
all
why
the
it's
time.
brilliant.
Thank you.
That's
All
why
right.
it's brilliant. We're going to have a
All
brand
right.
new
We
college
will leave
delivered
that.
next year.
We will leave it there.
Absolutely. Brought to you by the Labour Councillors.
Thank you very much. We could go on all night, couldn't we? Thank you to our candidates for joining us here in the studio tonight. If you want to listen back to the Forest of Dean debate, you can do. bbc.co.uk/Gloucestershire. Click listen again. And tomorrow night from 6 o'clock, some of the candidates will be standing for the Stroud constituency. Do join us then. Georgie Spanswick follows the news, which is next.